The origin of freedom and justice. Imagine a world before laws, before nations, before the first symbols carved into stone. A world where the only authority was the sky above, the earth beneath, and the fragile bodies moving between them. In that world, every step carried a silent question. How do we live together? How do we share? How do we survive without destroying the very community that keeps us alive? And beneath those questions was an even older longing, something woven into the nervous system of every creature that ever dared to move on its own. The desire to choose, the desire to be free. Tonight, we begin a long journey, calm and expansive, through the history and psychology of two of humanity's most powerful and mysterious ideas, freedom and justice. For 4 hours, we will trace their origins across continents and centuries, from the first sparks of autonomy in early humans, to the great civilizations that built written laws, to the revolutions that reshaped societies, and the emerging future of global rights in an age of technology and change. Before we begin, take a moment to settle. Let the breath rise and fall gently. Let the shoulders soften. Let the mind widen a little. This journey will be thoughtful, unhurried, and rich with discovery. We will move through thousands of years, but we will do it in a way that feels steady, grounded, and clear. Freedom and justice are not inventions of modern law books or political debates. They are ancient, older than writing, older than history, older even than our species. They emerge from instincts shared with other animals. They grow through culture. They expand through philosophy. They blossom through struggle. And they reshape themselves every time a generation dares to ask what it means to live with dignity. To understand their story, we begin not in a courtroom or a parliament, but in the deep past, in the trembling dawn of human existence. A small band of early humans walks across a plain, carrying tools chipped from stone. The wind moves through tall grass. The sun is slipping below the horizon. They are not thinking about freedom or justice the way we do today, but they feel the pull of autonomy, the need to make choices that secure their survival, the need to belong while still being themselves. And within the group, they navigate fairness. Who eats first? Who protects the young? Who decides when to move? These early negotiations form the quiet foundation of everything that will follow. To explore the origins of freedom and justice is to explore human nature itself. It is to understand why we strive, why we protest, why we dream of better worlds when the current one fails to honor our potential. It is to explore how fear and power, empathy and cooperation, conflict and compassion weave together to shape the structures that hold societies in place. Over the next hours, the story will unfold gradually, like a vast tapestry being revealed. We will follow early humans as they develop the instinct for autonomy. We will look at primates, elephants, wolves, and other animals to understand the roots of fairness and reciprocity. We will walk through ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, India, and China to see how laws and philosophies emerged. We will examine the rise of individual rights, the influence of religions, and the revolutions that forged modern states. We will consider the psychology of oppression and the resilience of those who resist it. And finally, we will stand at the threshold of the future, asking what freedom will mean in a world shaped by artificial intelligence, surveillance, climate change, and global interdependence. Throughout this journey, you may notice moments of natural stillness, moments where the breath returns to you, moments where the mind gently expands like a horizon touched by early morning light. Let these be quiet spaces between chapters. They are invitations, not instructions. Gentle reminders of the inner freedom that mirrors the story we are exploring. The origin of freedom and justice is not a single event. It is a continuous unfolding. A movement from instinct to story, from story to law, from law to philosophy, from philosophy to revolution. Each era adds a new thread, a new vision, a new question, and that journey is still unfolding today through each of us. As we move forward, imagine yourself walking slowly through time, watching the human world grow around you. Villages become cities, myths become principles, customs become laws, arguments become revolutions, and through all of it, people search for the same things: the space to live as themselves, and the assurance that they will be treated fairly. Take one more slow breath. Let the mind settle like soft sand. Our journey begins at the most ancient layer of all, deep in the world of early humans, where the instinct for freedom first took shape. The instinct for freedom. Long before the first cities rose from riverbanks, before the first empires carved their symbols into stone, early humans wandered through a world of firelight and shifting seasons. They were not yet surrounded by walls or governed by kings. Instead, they lived beneath open skies, in small bands that depended on one another for survival. In these ancient landscapes, the instinct for freedom began to take shape, not as an idea spoken aloud, but as a quiet tension within the body. A longing for movement, choice, and self-direction. A longing that every creature feels when it steps out into the world and decides where to go. Imagine an early human standing at the edge of a forest. The air is cool. The ground carries the faint prints of animals that passed during the night. Around them, the rest of the group prepares for the day, gathering tools, checking the weather, exchanging glances that hold centuries of unspoken knowledge. In this moment, the question of what to do next hovers silently. Stay or move, hunt here or travel farther, risk or caution. Every choice becomes a small declaration of autonomy. Freedom, at its root, is the ability to move without undue restraint. To lift a hand, take a step, choose a direction, or shape an action according to one's own will. Long before we invented the word for it, our nervous systems were already wired to seek it. The urge to explore, to investigate, to push boundaries, to claim space. These impulses are not modern inventions. They are ancient survival mechanisms, etched into the brain by millions of years of evolution. Even the earliest humans needed autonomy to survive. A hunter who froze in obedience to the group when a dangerous animal approached might perish. A gatherer who never strayed from familiar territory might miss seasonal shifts in resources. A child who did not learn to take initiative could not become an adult capable of leading or protecting others. Autonomy was not a luxury, it was a requirement. As early humans developed larger and more complex brains, they also developed a greater capacity for imagination. They could picture scenarios before acting. They could envision consequences. They could anticipate the reactions of others. With imagination came a deeper experience of self, and with self came a stronger sense of personal choice. The world no longer felt like something that simply happened to them. It became something they could shape. But freedom never existed in isolation. In small bands of early humans, autonomy was always balanced against the needs of the group. A choice that endangered the community could lead to conflict, punishment, or exclusion. So early humans developed an intuitive understanding of when to assert themselves and when to yield. They learned the art of negotiation, the subtle dance of cooperation, a shared rhythm of giving and taking that allowed each person enough space to feel independent while maintaining the unity necessary for survival. If you pause for a breath, allowing the chest to rise softly, you might sense something familiar in that dynamic. The feeling of wanting to be your own person, yet also wanting to belong. This tension is one of the oldest we carry. It is the first thread in the story of freedom and justice. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies often observe a value system that emphasizes personal autonomy. Decisions are made by consensus rather than force. Leaders guide but do not command. Individuals are free to leave one group and join another if conflicts become too great. In such societies, the idea of one person dominating others is often viewed with suspicion. Aggressive control is discouraged. Sharing is encouraged. The freedom to move away from coercion becomes a natural safeguard against tyranny. Early humans lived with the same mechanisms. If a member of the group attempted to control others too harshly, they risked isolation. If a person refused to contribute, they risked being ignored. Through these interactions, the first psychological blueprint for freedom emerged. Not a political ideology, but a lived experience of balancing self-direction with collective harmony. Over thousands of generations, small changes in the human brain refined these instincts. The neocortex expanded, allowing for more complex reasoning. Social intelligence deepened. Emotional awareness evolved. Humans learned not only how to choose, but how to reflect upon their choices. They began to understand the desires of others, empathize with their struggles, and anticipate their reactions. This emotional expansion strengthened the foundation of freedom by weaving it into the fabric of relationship. Freedom became more than the ability to move. It became the ability to express oneself, to carry a thought, a preference, a dream, to negotiate a path through the social landscape. It became an inner experience as much as an outer one, a sense of self-direction that gave life texture and meaning. As hunter-gatherer societies developed rituals, stories, and traditions, the instinct for autonomy found expression in ceremony and culture. Initiation rites marked the transition from childhood dependence to adult agency. Songs and myths celebrated those who ventured into the unknown. Oral histories remembered the courage of individuals who dared to challenge danger for the sake of the community. These stories were not just entertainment. They were reminders of the value of independence, courage, and choice. Still, freedom in early human life was fragile. It depended on the land, the seasons, the movements of animals, and the stability of relationships. When resources were scarce, tensions could rise. When conflicts erupted, unity could break. When dangers approached, individual desires sometimes yielded to collective necessity. Yet even in these moments, the desire for autonomy did not vanish. It simply moved beneath the surface, waiting for a calmer day. Take a slow breath here. Notice the quiet space between the inhale and the exhale. Early humans lived in that same rhythm, periods of movement and periods of stillness, times of independence and times of togetherness. Freedom was not constant. It ebbed and flowed like a tide. As generations passed, humans migrated across continents, adapting to deserts, forests, mountains, and coastlines. With each migration came new possibilities for autonomy, the freedom to explore new territory, the freedom to develop new customs, the freedom to encounter and learn from other groups. These migrations expanded the human mind as much as the human map. They tested the balance between personal desires and shared responsibilities. Within these early societies, gender roles, family structures, and leadership patterns varied widely. Some groups valued equality between members, while others assigned specific responsibilities. But across cultures, one principle remained consistent. People valued the sense that they could shape their lives, at least to some degree. Whether through movement, creativity, skill, or the quiet strength of decision-making, autonomy remained central to the human experience. Psychologists today often speak of intrinsic motivation, the inner drive that makes us pursue goals not because we are told to, but because they feel meaningful. This drive is ancient. It guided early humans as they crafted tools, painted caves, developed languages, and explored the world's edges. When people act from their own internal compass, they feel alive. When they are forced, controlled, or silenced, something within them contracts. In those early days, humans felt that contraction too. The discomfort of being stopped, the frustration of being denied a choice, the tension of being pushed against one's will. These feelings laid the groundwork for our later ideas about oppression, injustice, and resistance. Before we had words for these experiences, we had emotional reactions to them. Freedom, then, did not begin as a philosophical concept. It began as a biological feeling, a sensation in the bones and breath, a recognition that life expands when we choose and shrinks when we are denied. As early humans formed deeper social bonds, they discovered the power of shared autonomy. Groups that respected individual choice often thrived because people were motivated to contribute. Creativity flourished. Leadership emerged naturally from respect rather than fear. People felt invested in the group's well-being because their personal identities were honored. When conflicts arose, early humans developed methods of mediation. Elders offered guidance. Groups gathered to discuss disagreements. Compensation systems, apologies, and rituals helped restore balance. These practices fostered trust, and trust allowed freedom to grow. The more people trusted one another, the more space they gave each other to act independently. Freedom in these ancient societies was not perfect. It was shaped by survival pressures, group dynamics, and environmental challenges. But it formed the essential foundation upon which all later ideas of liberty would be built. Without these early experiences of autonomy, humans would not have developed the sensitivity to injustice or the drive to seek fairness. As the sun set on each long day, early humans would gather around fire. The flames flickered against stone and wood, casting shadows that danced and stretched. Stories were shared. Food was passed from hand to hand. Laughter rose, or silence settled. In these moments, people felt both rooted in the group and free within themselves. The firelight held a space where imagination expanded and the world felt wide. Take a gentle breath. Let the image of firelight soften into the background of your thoughts. The instinct for freedom began long before the first law was written or the first philosopher asked what it means to be free. It began at the dawn of our species, in small choices, quiet movements, and the inner spark that moves every human being to shape their own path. In the next part of our journey, we look deeper into the animal world, where the roots of fairness can be seen long before humanity arrived. Fairness in nature. Before humans carved symbols of law into stone or debated justice in ancient forums, the roots of fairness were already growing in the living world around us. To understand where justice begins, We step gently out of the human story for a moment and walk into forests, grasslands, oceans, and social groups of animals that have been negotiating cooperation for millions of years. The instinct for freedom may have shaped our sense of self, but the instinct for fairness helped shape the way we live together. As the image of ancient firelight fades, imagine the world widening again. The night sky stretches into a canopy of stars. The breath settles in the body. There is a soft shift, a gentle transition, as if stepping from one circle of light into another. We move now from early humans to the broader tapestry of life, where patterns of justice and reciprocity appear in surprising forms. Fairness is not an invention of civilized society. It is a strategy, a survival mechanism, and in many species, an emotional reality. Long before humans walked upright, animals were already responding to fairness and unfairness in ways that foreshadow our own moral psychology. Consider chimpanzees, our closest living relatives. In their communities, cooperation is essential. They share food, groom one another, defend the group, and form alliances that determine social stability. Researchers have observed that chimpanzees react strongly to unfair treatment. When two chimps complete a task, but only one receives a better reward, the other often protests, refuses to participate, or expresses frustration. They know when something is not equitable. They sense the imbalance. This is not logic, it is feeling, a deep-rooted emotional system that tracks fairness. Capuchin monkeys demonstrate a similar sensitivity. In a well-known experiment, two monkeys were asked to perform the same task. When both received small rewards, they cooperated happily. But when one was suddenly given a more desirable reward for the same task, the other reacted with outrage. It threw the lesser reward aside. It pounded the table. It looked to the researchers as if demanding an explanation. The message was clear. The imbalance mattered. These reactions are not mere impulses. They are signals. Communication within the group that says, fairness matters here. We thrive when we are treated well. We resist when we are not. Other species reveal even more nuances. Elephants mourn their dead, share resources, and show compassion to injured members. Dolphins cooperate in hunting strategies that require precise coordination and trust. Wolves punish members who betray group expectations, but they also share food and support those who are vulnerable. Meerkats take turns watching for predators while others forage. Vampire bats share blood meals with those who came home empty-handed, expecting that generosity will be returned in the future. Every one of these behaviors carries an ancient echo of what humans later called justice. If you pause for a breath, you may notice how natural fairness feels in your own body. The relief of being treated well, the discomfort of being treated poorly. These sensations connect you not only to humanity, but to a vast network of life that has been shaped by cooperation and reciprocity. Fairness is not simply about equality. It is about maintaining balance in a world where survival depends on collaboration. For animals, unfairness disrupts trust. It threatens relationships. It endangers the group. When fairness is upheld, cooperation becomes easier. Bonds strengthen. The group thrives. Science suggests that fairness evolved because it supports social stability. Groups that treat one another fairly are more resilient, more adaptable, and more likely to survive environmental challenges. Nature rewards cooperation because cooperation increases survival. In many species, individuals remember kindness. They also remember betrayal. This memory shapes future interactions in ways that resemble primitive forms of justice. A wolf who refuses to share may find others less willing to protect it later. A chimpanzee who bullies others may face coordinated resistance. These consequences are not codified in written rules. They live in the rhythms of behavior, in the patterns of interaction, in the subtle language of trust. Some animals even show what appears to be empathy. Ravens console distressed companions. Rats work to free trapped peers. Bonobos share food with strangers. These acts reflect a deeper emotional intelligence, an instinct to alleviate suffering or restore balance. As humans evolved from these ancient lineages, we carried these emotional systems with us. Our brains grew larger, our societies more complex, but the fundamental reactions, fairness feels right, unfairness feels wrong, remained constant. These instincts would later become the seeds of moral systems, laws, and philosophies. Imagine for a moment a group of early humans watching animals move across the landscape. They would have seen wolves cooperating, elephants supporting one another, primates sharing food. Such observations may have shaped their understanding of how communities thrive. The natural world would have been a living textbook on balance and reciprocity. There is a quiet wisdom in seeing justice, not as a human invention, but as something that grows from the soil of life itself. It reveals that our longing for fairness is not merely cultural. It is biological, it is ancient, it is shared. If you let the breath settle once more, you may feel a continuity between yourself and the natural world. A sense that justice is not imposed from outside, but arises from within us, shaped by millions of years of social living. This understanding creates a gentle bridge toward the next chapter, where fairness begins to transform from instinct into structure. As human groups grew larger, cooperation required more than emotion. It required patterns, expectations, and agreements. Instinct alone could no longer hold the community together. Something new had to emerge, something that would eventually become the foundation of law. We step now, the calm and steady pace, into the world of early tribes, where the birth of rules quietly reshaped the path of human history. The birth of rules. As human groups expanded, instinct alone could no longer guide the delicate balance between freedom and fairness. Small bands that once traveled lightly across open landscapes began forming larger, more settled communities. Resources needed protection, responsibilities needed clarity, conflicts needed resolution. And so, gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, rules began to emerge. Imagine a group of early humans building a temporary camp near a river. The air is warm. The sound of flowing water creates a steady rhythm. Families gather around small fires as dusk settles. Everyone knows, without being told, who will watch the children, who will prepare the food, who will take first watch at night. These roles are not assigned by decree. They emerge from experience and trust. Over time, patterns form. These patterns become expectations. Expectations take root as norms, and norms become the earliest rules. Rules did not begin as written commands. They began as shared understandings, a quiet, collective agreement that certain behaviors kept the community safe. Perhaps an elder reminded the young not to wander far at night. Perhaps a skilled hunter insisted that food be shared fairly. Perhaps the group discovered that disputes resolved through calm discussion prevented violence and maintained harmony. These practices, repeated generation after generation, became the invisible architecture of early society. Take a slow breath here. Notice how rules arise even in everyday life today. Families, friendships, and workplaces develop unspoken agreements. We sense what brings balance and what causes friction. Early humans lived the same way, guided by the natural ebb and flow of group living. But as communities grew, so did the challenges. With more people came more perspectives, more desires, more conflicts. A disagreement over food could escalate. A boundary between families could blur. Jealousies could rise. When a group of 20 became a group of 50 or 100, the old instinctive systems were no longer enough. Anthropologists studying traditional hunter-gatherer societies have found that early rules often centered on four essential pillars: sharing, conflict resolution, protection, and reputation. Sharing ensured survival. If one person hoarded food while others starved, resentment and collapse followed. So communities encouraged generosity. Those who gave were honored. Those who took too much faced quiet disapproval or social pressure. Conflict resolution protected the group from splitting apart. Instead of allowing fights to escalate, elders or respected members intervened. Words replaced weapons. Apologies replaced vengeance. Rituals emerged to restore trust, from symbolic exchanges to storytelling ceremonies that reminded people of their shared bonds. Protection required that everyone contribute to the well-being of the community. Whether hunting, gathering, tending fires, or protecting children, each person had a role. Rules formed around these responsibilities, creating a sense of order. Reputation became one of the earliest forms of social currency. A person known for honesty and cooperation gained allies and influence. One known for deception or aggression lost status. Reputation helped regulate behavior long before formal punishment existed. These unwritten systems formed what scholars sometimes call proto-law. They were not enforced by rulers or courts, but by the community's collective expectations. Breaking the rules meant losing trust, losing status, or in severe cases, being asked to leave the group. In a world where isolation meant danger, exclusion was a powerful consequence. As the breath moves quietly in and out, notice how natural these mechanisms feel. Even today, many of our social interactions depend on trust, reputation, and unspoken norms. These ancient foundations still shape modern behavior. With time, early tribes began to develop symbols and rituals that anchored their rules more firmly. A story told by the fire might speak of the consequences of greed. A ritual might reinforce the importance of cooperation. A dance might celebrate unity after a conflict. These cultural practices did more than entertain. They served as memory systems, preserving wisdom long before writing existed. Some early societies also began to appoint leaders. These leaders were not kings or tyrants, but respected individuals chosen for their wisdom, fairness, or skill. Their role was not to command, but to guide. They helped interpret the norms, mediate disputes, and protect the harmony of the group. In many communities, leadership rotated or was shared, ensuring no single individual held excessive power. Still, the need for structure grew. As agriculture emerged and humans began settling into more permanent villages, new conflicts arose. Land ownership, inheritance, and resource distribution became pressing issues. The simplicity of earlier rules could not keep pace with the complexity of settled life. And so, the earliest forms of formal justice began to appear. Imagine a village at the edge of a fertile valley. Fields stretch into the distance. Huts form a loose circle around a communal space. For the first time, people stay in one place long enough to accumulate resources. Grain, tools, pottery, and livestock become valuable possessions. With value comes vulnerability. With vulnerability comes the need for protection. With protection comes the need for rules. Villagers might gather beneath a large tree to discuss disputes. Elders might listen to both sides and propose solutions. Over time, these solutions become precedents, guiding future decisions. Precedents become traditions. Traditions become laws in the making. The seeds of formal justice begin to sprout. Early rules often reflected the values of the community: fair distribution, protection of the weak, respect for elders. Punishments that focused on restoring balance rather than inflicting harm. Some groups emphasized compensation, others emphasized reconciliation. Only later would societies turn toward harsher forms of punishment. These early systems revealed something profound. Humans have always looked for ways to balance personal freedom with collective order. We have always sought structures that protect autonomy while preserving harmony. Rules were not created to suppress freedom, but to safeguard it, to ensure that one person's freedom did not destroy another's. If you pause again, letting the breath settle, you may notice how this balance feels in your own life. The interplay between wanting freedom and wanting fairness, between seeking individuality and belonging to something larger. From these early communities, the idea of justice slowly took shape. It was no longer just an emotional reaction to unfairness or a natural instinct toward cooperation. It became a shared effort to maintain order, to prevent conflict, to define right and wrong in a way the entire group could understand. These unwritten rules laid the foundation for something extraordinary, a shift from fluid norms to fixed principles, a shift from stories to codes, a shift from memory to writing. As human societies grew more complex, they needed a way to preserve laws across generations. They needed rules that did not depend on the presence of specific elders, rules that remained even as people changed. This need led to one of the most important developments in human history: writing. And with writing came the first written laws, the first formal codes of justice. Let the breath move softly as we step forward in time. The world becomes larger. Villages grow into cities. Communities grow into kingdoms. And the earliest symbols of law appear on clay tablets and stone pillars, marking the beginning of a new chapter in the story of freedom and justice. We step now into the world of ancient codes. Ancient codes. As human societies expanded into villages, towns, and early city-states, a profound transformation swept across the ancient world. What once depended on memory, custom, and the wisdom of elders began shifting into something more enduring. Writing emerged as a technology of permanence, and with it came humanity's first attempts to carve justice into stone. Picture an ancient city rising from the plains of Mesopotamia. Sunlight strikes mud brick walls. Markets hum with trade. Irrigation canals shimmer in the distance. People move through narrow streets carrying baskets of grain, jars of oil, woven cloth, and clay tablets marked with early symbols. In this blossoming world, the complexity of daily life demanded something new. More people meant more interactions. More interactions meant more disputes, and more disputes demanded clear, consistent rules. The first written laws did not appear suddenly. They were shaped by centuries of oral tradition, customary norms, and lived experience. Yet when they were finally set into writing, they changed everything. A rule carved into stone was no longer dependent on memory. It could not be twisted by the powerful or forgotten by the next generation. It stood as a shared reference, visible to all. One of the earliest and most famous examples is the Code of Hammurabi, created around 1750 BCE in Babylon. Imagine a massive black stone stele standing upright in a public square, covered in cuneiform characters arranged in careful lines. The king Hammurabi appears carved at the top, receiving authority from the divine. Below, nearly 300 laws are inscribed, giving shape to the principles of fairness as the Babylonians understood them. These laws cover a range of human experiences: trade, marriage, theft, injury, property, inheritance. They aim to protect the vulnerable, resolve disputes, and maintain order. Some principles feel recognizable even today. Others reflect the values and limitations of their time. But their significance lies not only in their content, but in their existence. They represent a pivotal moment in human history. A moment when justice stepped from the fluid realm of memory into the solid world of record. Take a slow breath. Imagine the feeling of seeing your society's rules written down for the first time. The sense of security, the sense of clarity, the reassurance that fairness was no longer only in the hands of the powerful or the elders, but in a form everyone could see. Hammurabi's code is often remembered for its strict punishments, including the famous principle of an eye for an eye. Yet even this idea reflected an attempt to limit retaliation rather than encourage it. In a world where revenge could spiral out of control, proportional justice was a way to contain violence and maintain stability. But Hammurabi's code was not the only early legal text. In ancient Sumer, even older tablets contain lists of punishments and decrees that helped maintain social order. These early Mesopotamian societies understood that justice required structure, and structure required clarity. Travel now along the Nile to ancient Egypt. Here, justice took on a somewhat different character. The Egyptians did not produce a single written code like Hammurabi's, but their legal system was grounded in the concept of ma'at. Ma'at represented truth, balance, harmony, and cosmic order. It was not simply a set of rules, it was a worldview. Imagine standing before an Egyptian court. A dispute is brought between two citizens. The judge listens carefully. Instead of consulting a tablet of laws, the judge reflects on ma'at. What action restores balance? What decision aligns with truth? What outcome preserves harmony? Justice, in this context, was a living principle rather than a fixed inscription. Ma'at shaped everything from taxation to property rights, from marriage to criminal behavior. It influenced how pharaohs ruled, how priests interpreted divine will, and how ordinary people understood their place in the world. The breath moves in gently here, as if echoing the Egyptian belief that order and balance were essential for the well-being of both society and the cosmos. Farther east, in ancient China, early dynasties developed legal systems rooted in both ethical philosophy and political order. The Shang dynasty used divination and ancestral guidance to determine justice. Later, texts from the Zhou dynasty described rights and moral duties. Still later, philosophers like Confucius and Laozi would reshape the foundations of justice, emphasizing virtue, harmony, and the moral character of rulers. But even in the earliest Chinese societies, the seeds of law took shape through a blend of tradition, ritual, and hierarchy. In ancient India, the earliest foundations of law appear in texts such as the Rig Veda and later the Dharma Shastras. Here, the concept of Dharma functioned much like Ma'at in Egypt, a guiding principle that governed right action, social duties, and moral balance. Law was not simply a matter of punishment, but of aligning one's actions with the deeper order of the universe. Across these civilizations, a pattern emerges. Each society developed its own system of justice, shaped by geography, culture, religion, and worldview. Yet they share common threads: rules that protect the vulnerable, systems that regulate trade, principles that address injury and wrongdoing, rituals that restore balance, codes that codify expectations. As societies grew, laws became increasingly complex. They addressed contracts, debts, wages, apprenticeships, taxes, and responsibilities of rulers. They shaped the conditions of everyday life for farmers, merchants, artisans, priests, and leaders. Justice became a visible structure upon which society rested. Let the breath settle softly. Notice how these ancient codes reflect the same balance humans have always sought: the desire for freedom tempered by the need for fairness, the desire for order shaped by the need to protect individuals from harm. The transition from unwritten norms to written laws marks one of humanity's great turning points. Writing allowed justice to outlast memory. It allowed societies to grow beyond the limits of oral tradition. It allowed fairness to be debated, interpreted, and refined across generations. But laws alone were not enough. Humans also needed stories to explain why certain rules mattered. Myths, legends, and narratives carried moral lessons to children and adults alike. Stories reached the heart in a way that laws could not. They shaped imagination, desire, and identity. From ancient codes, we move now into the realm of myth, a place where gods, heroes, and spirits helped early societies understand freedom, obedience, defiance, and justice. A place where morality was not only taught, but felt. The breath moves gently as one chapter folds into another. The world shifts from stone tablets to firelit stories, from carved laws to spoken legends. We step now into the world of myth and story, where freedom and justice take on symbolic forms that shaped entire civilizations. Freedom in myth and story. Long before philosophy, long before political theory, and long before legal codes hardened into stone, humans made sense of the world through story. Myths were the first classrooms, the first moral compasses, the first mirrors in which people saw their fears, desires, and dreams reflected in forms larger than life. Through myth, early societies explored the meaning of freedom and the consequences of injustice long before they could articulate these concepts directly. As the stone tablets of ancient codes fade into the background of memory, imagine once again the glow of firelight. Sparks rise into a night thick with stars. The air is cool. People gather close, children leaning against elders, adults listening with quiet reverence. Someone begins to speak, their voice steady, rhythmic, carrying not just information, but emotion, wonder, and identity. In that circle of light, myth becomes a guide. Take a slow breath, letting the darkness around the fire settle gently. This is where the earliest understanding of freedom and justice lived, not in texts, but in the imagination. Across the ancient world, myths addressed the same themes again and again: creation, rebellion, harmony, chaos, punishment, liberation. Through these stories, early humans began to understand the boundaries of behavior, the responsibilities of leaders, and the moral consequences of action. In Mesopotamian myth, tales such as the Epic of Gilgamesh explore the tension between power and humility. Gilgamesh, a king gifted with immense strength, begins his journey with arrogance, using his authority to control and exploit others. The gods intervene by creating Enkidu, a wild man who becomes both the companion and a reflection of the king's humanity. Their story reveals the dangers of unchecked power and the need for compassion, wisdom, and balance. Though not an explicit treatise on justice, the epic teaches that true leadership requires restraint, empathy, and respect for the limits of power. Greek mythology expands these themes in vivid, symbolic forms. Prometheus defies the gods to bring fire to humanity, a myth of rebellion, knowledge, and the pursuit of freedom. Yet he is punished severely, reminding listeners that liberation often demands sacrifice. The story of Antigone explores the conflict between moral duty and state law. She chooses loyalty to family and divine justice over obedience to the king, revealing the eternal struggle between individual conscience and authority. The breath moves softly here, as if honoring the gravity of these stories. Myth did not simply entertain. It shaped the emotional landscape in which people understood justice. African oral traditions provide another rich landscape of moral storytelling, built not on written texts, but on living voices. Trickster figures such as Anansi the spider challenge power structures with wit and intelligence. These stories show that wisdom can triumph over strength, and that rules must be interpreted with nuance. They teach resilience, adaptability, and the idea that justice often comes from unexpected places. In the ancient Indian epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, justice is explored through the concept of dharma. Characters face profound moral dilemmas with no simple answers. A prince must choose between personal desire and duty. Warriors must decide between loyalty to family and loyalty to righteousness. These epics reveal a worldview in which justice is not rigid, but dynamic, shaped by context, intention, and cosmic order. Farther east, in Chinese mythology, stories of wise rulers, dragons, and immortal sages teach the importance of harmony, virtue, and moral leadership. Legends, such as the tale of Yu the Great, who tamed the floods not through force but through perseverance and compassion, reflect the early belief that rightful authority emerges not from domination, but from service to the greater good. Indigenous cultures around the world, from the First Nations of the Americas to the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, used myth to teach respect for land, community, and the delicate balance of life. Their stories often emphasize interdependence. Justice, in these traditions, is not about punishment, but about restoring harmony between humans, animals, and the natural world. Whether told around fires, sung in ceremonies, or carved into totems and symbols, these stories shaped how people saw themselves and their societies. They offered guidance in times of uncertainty. They provided frameworks for understanding conflict, leadership, misbehavior, and reconciliation. Most importantly, they cultivated a shared moral imagination long before formal systems of justice existed. Myth gave people characters to emulate and actions to avoid. It showed that bravery often meant defying unjust authority, that compassion was as powerful as strength, that freedom was intertwined with responsibility, that justice required wisdom, not merely obedience. If you pause for a breath, notice the gentle way these stories live within you. Even today, modern narratives, films, novels, legends shape our sense of what is fair, noble, and right. The stories we grow up with influence the choices we make, just as they did for ancient peoples. Myth also helped communities navigate the mysteries of life: birth, death, love, betrayal, success, failure. In doing so, it prepared them for the complexities of judgment, to understand why people act as they do, to recognize the impact of choices, to see justice as something more nuanced than simple reward and punishment. Through these layered stories, societies developed a shared moral fabric. They began to imagine what a just world could look like. They began to dream of freedom as something sacred, something worth protecting, something that connected humans to the divine. Gradually, as cities grew and civilizations flourished, this mythic groundwork blended with emerging philosophies, laws, and institutions. The imaginative world of story gave shape to the structured world of governance. Values that once lived only in legend began to be written into policies, practices, and legal codes. As the firelight dims once more, the breath rises and falls gently. The stories dissolve into early dawn. A new landscape appears. Temples, courts, and marketplaces fill the horizon. The world becomes more organized, more layered, more ambitious. The mythic imagination has prepared humanity for the next great chapter in the development of justice. We step now into the ancient civilizations where justice becomes not only a story or a principle, but a system, crafted, debated, refined, and practiced across generations. Justice in ancient civilizations. As myths shaped the moral imagination of early societies, another transformation unfolded across the ancient world. The stories that once guided behavior began to merge with philosophy, governance, and law. Justice moved from the fireside to the forum, from ritual to institution, from legend to deliberate design. Civilizations rose along great rivers and trade routes, each developing its own vision of what a fair society should be. Imagine the early morning light spreading across the Mediterranean, the Nile, the Indus Valley, the Yellow River Basin. Cities awaken, market stalls open, priests begin rituals, judges take their places in public squares. The breath settles softly as we step into this world, a world where justice becomes a visible, organized force. We begin in ancient Greece, a place where ideas themselves became instruments of transformation. In the bustling agora of Athens, citizens gathered to debate matters of law, politics, philosophy, and ethics. Here, justice was not simply inherited or dictated. It was questioned, reasoned, argued, shaped by the voices of those who lived within the system. Athens introduced one of the earliest forms of democracy, a direct model where citizens participated in decision-making. Juries of hundreds heard cases. Laws were discussed openly. While the system was imperfect and limited to a narrow group, its spirit marked a turning point in human history. Justice was no longer the domain of kings alone. It belonged, even if imperfectly, to the people. Philosophers added depth to these developments. Socrates walked the streets asking questions that challenged assumptions. What is virtue? What is justice? How should one live? His method of continuous inquiry revealed that justice was not merely a set of rules, but a reflection of the soul's alignment with truth. Plato, his student, envisioned a republic governed by philosopher kings, leaders shaped not by ambition, but by wisdom. For Plato, justice was harmony, each person fulfilling their proper role within society. His ideas influenced political thought for millennia. Aristotle, more grounded and pragmatic, saw justice as giving each person what they deserved. He distinguished between distributive justice, which concerns fairness in the distribution of goods and responsibilities, and corrective justice, which concerns restoring balance when harm is done. These ideas still echo in modern legal systems. As you take a slow breath, imagine these ancient thinkers speaking in open courtyards, their words carried on warm wind, shaping the intellectual foundations of law. Moving west to Rome, justice takes on a new character: practical, structured, expansive. The Romans developed one of the most sophisticated legal systems in the ancient world. Their laws covered citizenship, property, contracts, family, commerce, and governance. They built courts, trained magistrates, and created legal procedures designed to ensure consistency. Roman law introduced principles that still influence modern systems. The idea that laws should be written and publicly accessible. The concept of legal precedent. The belief that justice must align with reason. Over centuries, Roman law evolved into a complex, adaptable system that guided an empire spanning continents. Imagine standing in a Roman basilica where legal proceedings are underway. Advocates present arguments, witnesses speak, judges deliberate. The structure of justice is orderly, methodical, grounded in centuries of accumulated knowledge. It is a world shaped not only by power, but by principle. Farther east, in ancient India, justice developed through the rich tapestry of dharma, moral duty, righteousness, and cosmic order. Dharma was not only a legal concept, but a guiding philosophy. It shaped personal behavior, family roles, social responsibilities, and the responsibilities of rulers. Texts like the Manusmriti and the Arthashastra provided guidance for governance, law, economics, and ethics. While these texts contained hierarchical elements reflective of their time, they also emphasized fairness, protection of the vulnerable, and the responsibility of leaders to act with wisdom and restraint. A just ruler was expected to maintain both material prosperity and moral order. Take a gentle breath as we move east again, into ancient China. There, justice unfolded through two major traditions: Confucianism and legalism. Confucius taught that a just society arises from virtue, education, and moral leadership. Leaders should guide through example, not fear. Justice, in this view, is relational. Harmony is restored when each person fulfills their role with integrity. Legalists, on the other hand, believed that human nature required strong laws and strict enforcement. Order came not from virtue, but from clear regulations and consequences. These two perspectives shaped Chinese governance for centuries, balancing moral ideals with practical administration. As civilizations grew more interconnected, ideas about justice traveled along silk routes, trade networks, and migration paths. Concepts from one region influenced another. Philosophical ideas crossed borders. Legal innovations spread. The world's understanding of justice became richer, more layered, more complex. Across all these civilizations, certain patterns emerge. Justice becomes a force that protects order, regulates behavior, mediates conflict, and upholds values. The role of rulers becomes tied to fairness. The well-being of communities depends on predictable, balanced systems. Yet these systems were not perfect. Many were unequal, limited, or harsh by modern standards. Freedom was often restricted to certain classes. Justice was sometimes shaped by power rather than principle. But each society contributed a piece to the global tapestry, a step toward what justice could become. If you pause again, letting the breath move gently in and out, you may sense the way these ancient systems still resonate today. Courtrooms, legal codes, civic debates, philosophical discussions, all carry echoes of Greece, Rome, India, China, Egypt, Mesopotamia. As societies grew more complex, the idea of justice began intertwining with another emerging concept: the rights and dignity of the individual. Philosophers, rulers, and reformers would soon begin asking a new kind of question: not only how societies should be governed, but how individuals should be treated. This shift marks one of the most profound developments in human history: the rise of individual rights and the birth of political liberty. The breath settles. The world changes again. Empires rise and fall. New ideas ignite across continents. We now step into the era where freedom becomes the centerpiece of philosophical thought, reshaping justice in ways that will define the future: the rise of individual rights. As ancient civilizations refined their legal systems and philosophical traditions, a subtle but profound shift began to take shape. Justice was no longer understood solely as the balance of society or the harmony of the cosmos. A new question emerged. What does justice mean for the individual? What does it mean for a single human being to have dignity, autonomy, and rights that no ruler should violate? This shift unfolded slowly, across centuries, across continents, through revolutions of thought rather than revolutions of armies. And with it, the idea of freedom expanded from a privilege granted by society to something innate, something woven into the very experience of being human. Take a gentle breath as the world around us changes. The stone courts of ancient civilizations soften, replaced by libraries, academies, assemblies, and quiet rooms where thinkers reflect on human nature and the structure of society. The story becomes more introspective, more philosophical, more focused on the inner life of the individual. We begin again in Greece, where early notions of political freedom began to surface. In Athens, citizens debated laws directly, expressing an early form of political autonomy. While this system excluded many, including women, slaves, and foreigners, it introduced a radical idea that ordinary people could participate in shaping their own society. The Greek Stoic philosophers then took the idea further. They imagined a world where every human being, regardless of status or birthplace, belonged to a universal community. They believed all people shared a spark of reason, a fragment of divine order that gave them inherent worth. In this view, freedom was not granted by society, but discovered within oneself. A sacred autonomy that no external force could fully suppress. This idea traveled quietly through the centuries, carried by merchants, scholars, and soldiers across the Mediterranean. Then came Rome, where the concept of citizenship expanded rights and protections beyond a single city. Roman citizens had access to the law, the courts, and certain political privileges. Over time, citizenship grew to encompass people across the empire, creating a sense of shared identity and legal equality unknown in earlier civilizations. Roman jurists introduced the idea of ius naturale, or natural law, a set of universal principles believed to be inherent in human nature. Ideas such as fairness, equality under the law, and reason-based justice began to take root. These seeds would later blossom into the foundations of modern human rights. As the breath moves softly, the scene shifts again. Throughout the medieval world, new moral frameworks emerged. In Europe, Christianity introduced the idea that every soul had value in the eyes of God. Spiritual equality planted the seeds for later political equality. The early church debated the nature of moral law, the responsibilities of rulers, and the moral dignity of individuals. Though many systems of power remained unequal, the idea that a king must answer to a higher moral order challenged the notion of absolute rule. Documents like the Magna Carta in 1215 added another layer. For the first time, a king agreed, however reluctantly, that his power was not unlimited. He acknowledged that nobles had rights that could not be violated without consequence. While the document applied only to a small elite, it introduced a revolutionary principle. Law could restrain power. Rights could limit authority. This principle would continue to grow. In the Islamic world, scholars developed extensive legal and ethical systems based on the Quran and Hadith, emphasizing justice, charity, rights, and responsibilities. Intellectual traditions from Baghdad to Cordoba explored the nature of governance, the ethics of leadership, and the moral obligations of society. Thinkers like Al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd, and Al-Mawardi wrote about political order, social well-being, and the rights of individuals within the community. Their ideas blended philosophy, law, and spirituality, contributing to a rich global discourse on justice. In East Asia, Confucian thinkers placed immense responsibility on rulers to act with virtue, compassion, and integrity. A ruler who failed to maintain justice risked losing the mandate of heaven. This concept served as a moral check on authority, emphasizing that legitimacy came not from force but from ethical conduct. As centuries passed, these diverse currents began to converge. Trade routes, migrations, and cross-cultural exchanges allowed ideas to travel far beyond their origins. Philosophers drew inspiration from ancient texts. Scholars translated works across languages. Knowledge passed from one civilization to another, like a torch carried through time. Then, in the 17th and 18th centuries, a powerful intellectual movement began to reshape the world, the Enlightenment. Imagine European salons filled with thinkers discussing reason, science, and the nature of human experience. Imagine scholars poring over ancient texts, questioning traditions, and publishing new ideas. In this era, the belief in individual rights became more explicit, more urgent, more universal. John Locke argued that humans possess natural rights to life, liberty, and property. These rights were not granted by kings. They were inherent, and governments existed to protect them. If a ruler violated these rights, people had the right to resist. Jean-Jacques Rousseau explored the idea of the social contract, the notion that legitimate government arises from the consent of the governed. Freedom, in his view, was preserved not by rejecting society, but by creating a society in which everyone has a voice. Montesquieu developed the separation of powers, ensuring that no single individual or institution could dominate the political system. This idea laid the foundation for modern constitutional governance. Voltaire championed freedom of speech and religious tolerance. His writings challenged dogma and defended the right to think independently. As you let the breath settle, imagine the energy of this intellectual awakening, a world humming with new ideas about human dignity, equality, and freedom. These ideas were not merely academic, they ignited revolutions. The American Revolution declared that all men are created equal and possess unalienable rights. The French Revolution proclaimed liberty, equality, and fraternity. The Haitian Revolution, often overlooked yet profoundly significant, became the first successful uprising of enslaved people, asserting the universal reality of human freedom. These revolutions were imperfect, often exclusionary, and marked by violence. But they reshaped global consciousness. They introduced a new belief into the world, that freedom and justice belong not only to the elite, but to everyone. From this era onward, the idea of individual rights became central to political thought. Governments were increasingly judged not by their power, but by their protection of personal liberty. Writers, activists, and reformers across the world invoked these principles to challenge oppression and demand equality. Take a slow breath. Let the weight of this transformation settle. The story of justice is no longer limited to myth, custom, or philosophical reflection. It is becoming a universal ideal, shaping constitutions, laws, and human aspirations. Yet, even as rights expanded, society needed something deeper to ground them, something that connected justice not only to law, but to moral meaning. Religion and spirituality had long served this role, shaping ethical values and moral responsibility across civilizations. And so the journey continues, shifting now into the realm where divine law, sacred duty, and moral order help define what justice means for communities and individuals. The breath moves gently, and we step into the next part of the story: religion and moral order. As humanity stepped further into the age of expanding rights and new philosophies, another ancient force continued to shape the meaning of justice: religion. Long before constitutions and charters, long before parliaments and courts, people looked to the sacred for guidance. They sought wisdom in rituals, scriptures, and ceremonies, in the rhythms of nature, in the presence of ancestors, in the stories of gods, prophets, and enlightened teachers. Take a slow breath as the world around us shifts again. Imagine temples rising from desert sands, stone altars glowing in the first light of dawn, monasteries tucked into mountains, sacred texts carried across plains by travelers, scholars, and wanderers. Across these landscapes, religion became one of the earliest and most enduring sources of moral order. Religion offered more than rules. It offered meaning. It provided a sense of origin, purpose, and destiny. It created a moral map that guided communities through the uncertainties of life. In this map, justice was not merely social, it was cosmic; not merely legal, it was sacred. We begin in the ancient Near East, where early monotheistic traditions reshaped moral consciousness. In ancient Judaism, justice was grounded in a covenantal relationship between humans and the divine. The Hebrew scriptures speak repeatedly of fairness, compassion, and protection of the vulnerable. Widows, orphans, strangers, the poor, these groups held special status, safeguarded by divine command. Justice became an ethical duty, not only a social necessity. The prophets reinforced this message with powerful clarity. They condemned corruption, exploitation, and hypocrisy. They called for righteousness, not as ritual alone, but as action. A just society was one in which power was held accountable, and every person was treated with dignity. The breath moves gently as we follow the story into early Christianity. Here, justice took on the language of love, mercy, and forgiveness. Jesus taught that true righteousness came not from rigid adherence to rules, but from compassion, humility, and a willingness to care for those cast aside. His teachings emphasized inner transformation, the dignity of every soul, and the moral responsibility individuals have toward one another. Christian theology also introduced a powerful idea, that all people are equal before God. This belief challenged the notion of divine kingship and absolute authority. It planted seeds that would later influence movements for human rights, abolition, and democracy. Islam continued this thread with clarity and balance. In the 7th century, the Quran articulated a vision of justice rooted in fairness, charity, honesty, and responsibility. It emphasized social welfare, condemning exploitation and commanding protection for the weak. Islamic jurisprudence developed rigorous methods for interpreting moral and legal principles. Judges sought not only to uphold the law, but to ensure equity and compassion in their rulings. Imagine a judge in a medieval Islamic court. They listen to both sides of a dispute, consult scholars, weigh intentions, and consider social context. Justice here is not mechanical, it is moral, measured carefully against divine guidance and community well-being. The breath settles as we travel eastward into the philosophical landscapes of India. Hindu traditions place justice within the vast concept of dharma, which encompasses duty, virtue, order, and moral balance. Dharma varies by situation, role, and life stage, acknowledging that moral choices are complex. Justice in this worldview is not rigid but relational, tied to the harmony of the individual, society, and the universe. Buddhism takes a different path, grounding justice in compassion, non-violence, and the reduction of suffering. The Buddha taught that ethical behavior arises from clear awareness and deep empathy. Justice is not about punishment, but about understanding causes and conditions. It is about breaking cycles of harm through mindfulness, kindness, and wisdom. In China, Confucianism shaped morality through the cultivation of virtue, benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and trust. A just society depended on the character of its leaders. Authority was legitimate only when exercised with compassion and integrity. The mandate of heaven served as a moral test. A ruler who governed unjustly could lose divine approval, and with it, the right to rule. Taoism offered a contrasting perspective, emphasizing natural harmony and the avoidance of excessive force. Justice, in this worldview, aligns with the flow of life. It arises when humans live simply, avoid domination, and trust the inherent balance of the natural world. Across indigenous cultures globally, moral order emerged from the land itself. Spirituality was intertwined with nature, ancestry, and community. Justice meant restoring harmony between humans, animals, spirits, and the environment. When conflict arose, it was healed through dialogue, ritual, and reconciliation, not through rigid punishment. Take a soft breath. Notice how each tradition, despite differences in theology and culture, reaches toward the same aspiration. A world where individuals live with dignity. A world where power is restrained by moral responsibility. A world where justice is not merely enforced, but lived. Religion also carried justice into collective identity. Shared beliefs bound communities together. Moral codes created cohesion. Rituals reinforced values. Festivals renewed the sense of belonging. Even in societies without formal states, religion provided structure and accountability. But religion also shaped justice in challenging ways. Sacred texts could support fairness or justify hierarchy. Rituals could unify or exclude. Moral authority could inspire great compassion or be wielded to maintain power. These tensions reveal that religion, like all human institutions, could uplift or restrict freedom, depending on interpretation and context. Still, the influence of religion on moral order is unmistakable. It animated the hearts of billions. It shaped laws, customs, and political systems. It gave depth to the meaning of justice and breadth to the understanding of freedom. As centuries passed and societies changed, religious ideas mingled with philosophical reasoning and political reform. People began demanding not only divine justice, but social equality. Not only personal virtue, but structural fairness. Movements emerged calling for the liberation of the oppressed, the end of tyranny, and the recognition of universal rights. Let the breath deepen gently. A new energy enters the story, an energy of upheaval, courage, and transformation. It is the energy of revolution and reform. From the ashes of injustice, people rise. From the constraints of old systems, new visions emerge. The world begins to shift from moral order to political awakening. We step now into an era shaped by struggle and hope, where freedom becomes a cause strong enough to move entire nations. Revolutions and reform. As the spiritual and philosophical roots of justice deepened across civilizations, the world began to shift toward action. The idea that individuals possessed inherent worth and that rulers were accountable to moral law ignited something powerful. People started to believe that justice was not only an aspiration, but a right. That freedom was not only desirable, but necessary. And that when systems failed to honor these truths, societies could rise, reshape themselves, and demand something better. Take a calm breath as the scene around us changes. The quiet sanctuaries of spiritual reflection give way to crowded streets, whispered meetings, secret gatherings, and public squares trembling with anticipation. Justice takes on a new form, no longer only moral or philosophical, but political, collective, and transformative. We begin in the late 18th century, when a wave of revolutions swept across the world, each in its own way reshaping the meaning of freedom. In the American colonies, a diverse group of farmers, merchants, thinkers, and laborers gathered in assembly halls and taverns, questioning the authority of a distant monarchy. They spoke of natural rights, representation, and self-governance. Their movement was not perfect, yet their declaration made a bold claim. All people possess unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This idea, inspired by the Enlightenment and shaped by centuries of philosophical reflection, became a guiding flame visible far beyond the young nation's borders. Take a breath. Feel the weight of those words, not as political slogans, but as expressions of human dignity. Across the Atlantic, France erupted in its own revolution. Citizens filled the streets of Paris demanding liberty, equality, and fraternity. The Bastille fell. Assemblies declared new principles. Though the revolution descended into violence and turmoil, its central idea, that ordinary people had the right to shape their own destiny, reverberated through every corner of Europe. But perhaps the most profound revolution of the era unfolded on the island of Saint-Domingue, where enslaved Africans rose against colonial powers, defying an entire global system built on exploitation. The Haitian Revolution, led by individuals like Toussaint Louverture, stands as one of history's most powerful assertions of human freedom. For the first time, people who had been stripped of autonomy by force reclaimed it completely, establishing the first Black Republic in the modern world. Let the breath move softly here. These revolutions were complex, imperfect, and often violent, yet they transformed collective consciousness. They showed that justice could be demanded, not merely hoped for. Throughout the 19th century, reform movements continued to reshape societies. Abolitionists argued with moral clarity that slavery was incompatible with justice. Their voices rose in sermons, speeches, pamphlets, and protests. The abolition of slavery across much of the world became one of the greatest moral turning points in human history. Workers organized for fair wages and humane conditions during the Industrial Revolution. Where factories exploited labor, unions emerged to advocate for balance. Their efforts led to child labor laws, safety regulations, and the recognition of workers' rights, forms of justice that had not existed in earlier eras. Movements for women's rights gained strength across continents. Figures like Mary Wollstonecraft, Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, Emmeline Pankhurst, and countless unnamed organizers challenged systems that denied women the right to vote, own property, receive education, or participate in public life. Their courage reshaped the social fabric and expanded the meaning of freedom. Reform also touched prisons, schools, mental health institutions, and governance. Nations rewrote constitutions. Courts expanded civil liberties. Revolutions of thought inspired revolutions of policy. Take another breath and imagine the world in the early 20th century, trembling with change. Empires fell. New nations emerged. A growing sense of global interconnectedness pushed justice from a local concern to an international ideal. Yet injustice persisted. Oppression took new forms. Colonialism gripped much of the world. Racial discrimination shaped lives across continents. Wars tore apart societies. Millions suffered under authoritarian regimes. The promise of freedom was real, but far from complete. In the face of these challenges, new movements rose. Mahatma Gandhi led India's struggle for independence through non-violent resistance, demonstrating that moral force could be more powerful than violence. His approach inspired countless others: Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and activists across the globe who fought for civil rights, equality, and liberation. In South Africa, the anti-apartheid movement showed that even deeply entrenched systems of racial injustice could be dismantled through courage, solidarity, and moral clarity. Nelson Mandela's long walk to freedom became a global symbol of resilience and reconciliation. During the mid-20th century, civil rights movements transformed the United States, challenging segregation, discrimination, and systemic inequality. Freedom riders traveled the South. Marchers crossed bridges. Voices demanded change not with weapons, but with truth. As the breath settles, notice how justice continues to evolve. It is shaped by countless individuals, famous leaders, community organizers, quiet resistors, people who marched, people who wrote, people who refused to be silent. Each contributed a thread to the fabric of freedom. Revolutions and reforms reveal something essential about human nature. We resist oppression. We strive for dignity. We seek to reshape systems that deny our humanity. And each time we succeed, the world grows a little more just. But these transformations also reveal a darker truth. Oppression is resilient. It adapts. It emerges in new forms. Economic inequality, racial hierarchies, gender discrimination, political violence, cultural suppression, exploitation through new technologies. The struggle for freedom is ongoing. Each generation must confront its own forms of injustice. And to understand why oppression persists and how people resist it, we must look deeper into the psychology of control, conformity, courage, and resistance. Take a gentle breath. The energy of revolution softens, giving way to introspection. The crowd fades. The chants grow quiet. We move from public squares into the inner landscapes of the human mind. We step now into the next chapter, the psychology of oppression and the forces that shape our response to power. The psychology of oppression. Freedom and justice are not only social or political forces, They are psychological realities, shaped by the inner architecture of the human mind. To understand why oppression arises again and again throughout history, even after revolutions and reforms, we must look inward. We must explore the psychological patterns that lead some people to dominate others, and that lead many to comply, resist, endure, or rise. Take a slow breath as the noise of revolution fades. The world grows quieter, as though we have stepped into a deeper room within the human story, one lined not with laws or constitutions, but with emotions, fears, desires, and vulnerabilities. Oppression does not begin with armies or kings. It begins with human psychology. At its core, oppression is a distortion of power. Power itself is not inherently harmful. It is a necessary part of life. We need leaders, decision makers, protectors, organizers. Power helps societies function. But when fear, insecurity, or desire twist power into domination, oppression begins to grow. In early human societies, power was often fluid and shared. But as populations expanded and hierarchies formed, the temptation to centralize control grew stronger. Why? Because control creates certainty. It reduces ambiguity. It offers a sense of safety to those who wield it. Psychological research shows that uncertainty is deeply uncomfortable for the human brain. When we feel unsure or threatened, we seek stability, even if that stability comes at the cost of someone else's freedom. This is one root of oppression, the desire for security in a chaotic world. Another root lies in the human need for social belonging. We are intensely social creatures. From infancy, our survival depends on connection, but this need can be manipulated. Leaders who wish to consolidate power often use fear, propaganda, and division to bind followers together. They create an us that must be protected and a them that must be controlled or eliminated. This psychological divide has fueled countless forms of oppression: racism, caste systems, colonial domination, religious persecution, and political violence. Take a gentle breath here. Notice how easily the mind responds to belonging, to group identity, to the instinct to protect those we consider ours. This instinct, though natural, becomes dangerous when it is used to justify inequality. Obedience is another powerful psychological force. Experiments in social psychology show that ordinary people, under the influence of authority, can commit acts they would never imagine on their own. Obedience does not make a person cruel. It makes them human. Most people do not want conflict. They avoid standing out. They trust those in charge. They assume that someone else must know better. Oppression often thrives not because people embrace cruelty, but because they avoid confrontation. Yet the story does not end there. Humans also possess deep instincts for empathy, fairness, and resistance. Even under oppressive systems, people push back. They find subtle ways to defy authority: quiet refusals, shared glances, coded messages, acts of compassion, moments of courage. History is full of individuals who risked everything to protect others, challenge injustice, or preserve their own dignity. What gives rise to this courage? Psychologists point to several powerful sources. One is empathy, the ability to feel the suffering of others so strongly that inaction becomes unbearable. Another is moral identity, the belief that one must act according to inner principles, even when danger looms. Yet another is the quiet strength that comes from community. People resist more effectively when they know they are not alone. Oppression also persists because it shapes the inner life of the oppressed. Over time, people may internalize the message they are given, that they are lesser, powerless, unworthy. This psychological burden can be profound, yet even in the darkest circumstances, the spark of autonomy remains. Humans carry a deep evolutionary drive for self-direction. Even if buried, it does not disappear. Take a slow breath and allow a moment of stillness. Notice how the mind reflects on both sides of oppression, the one who dominates and the one who endures. These roles are not fixed. History shows that those who suffer today may gain power tomorrow, and those who dominate may fall. Oppression is not a natural order. It is a human construction. And what humans construct, humans can dismantle. Over the last century, new insights emerged about how trauma shapes communities under oppression. Generations can carry the psychological wounds of violence, displacement, and discrimination. Healing requires more than policy changes. It requires justice that acknowledges suffering, restores dignity, and rebuilds trust. In many societies, truth and reconciliation processes have served as bridges between pain and healing. These processes recognize a powerful truth. Justice is not only about laws, it is about acknowledging harm, validating experience, and restoring humanity. When people feel seen, heard, and affirmed, psychological wounds begin to close. Oppression also teaches us something important about freedom. Freedom is not only the absence of chains. It is the presence of choice, security, opportunity, and psychological safety. People are not fully free until they feel free, until their minds are as unburdened as their bodies. Mental freedom, social freedom, economic freedom, and political freedom are intertwined. Weakness in one weakens them all. As societies confronted the horrors of war, genocide, slavery, colonialism, and discrimination, a new understanding emerged. That justice must extend beyond national borders. That dignity belongs not only to citizens, but to all human beings. That the world needed a shared framework to protect the fundamental rights of every person. Let the breath settle. The psychological landscape slowly gives way to a global one. The lessons of oppression set the stage for something unprecedented, a worldwide attempt to define and defend human dignity. We move now into the creation of modern human rights, where humanity's collective experience of suffering transformed into a universal commitment to justice. Modern human rights. As the world entered the 20th century, the scale of human suffering reached heights that demanded a profound reimagining of justice. 2 global wars, genocides, colonial domination, racial segregation, mass displacement, and economic exploitation forced humanity to confront a stark reality. Existing systems of law and morality were not enough. The old frameworks, national rights, cultural norms, religious law could not protect people from violence or tyranny on a global scale. Take a slow breath as the world around us shifts. The room grows larger, encompassing nations, continents, oceans. Voices from every corner of the planet begin to rise, calling for a new moral order, one that recognizes the dignity of every human being, not as a privilege, but as a birthright. In 1945, in the aftermath of World War II, nations gathered to create the United Nations. For the first time, representatives from diverse cultures and political systems sat together to imagine a shared future. They had witnessed immense destruction. They had seen the consequences of hatred, discrimination, and unchecked power. And they understood that if humanity was to survive its new age, an age of global technology, global conflict, and global interdependence, it needed global principles. 3 years later, in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. It stands as one of the most extraordinary documents ever created, not because it solved every problem, but because it expressed a vision of humanity defined not by nationality, race, religion, gender, or wealth, but by shared dignity. Imagine a hall filled with delegates. The air is thick with urgency, grief, hope. They debate words that would shape the future: the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to safety, education, and expression, the right to work, the right to participate in government, the right to be free from torture, slavery, and discrimination. The Declaration did not create a perfect world, but it gave the world a compass, an articulation of the values society must strive toward, a reminder that justice is not merely local or cultural, but universal. Take a breath. Let that universality settle gently. The decades that followed saw waves of independence movements sweep across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Colonized nations reclaimed their sovereignty. Leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Jawaharlal Nehru, Julius Nyerere, and many others built new nations rooted in liberty, equality, and self-determination. Though challenges remained, the global map shifted dramatically as people took back control over their own destinies. At the same time, civil rights movements emerged across the world. In the United States, Black Americans fought against segregation, discrimination, and violence. They marched, sat in, spoke out, organized, and demanded the rights promised to them, but long denied. Their efforts reshaped laws and awakened the conscience of a nation. In South Africa, as apartheid oppressed millions, activists mobilized across townships and universities. The world watched as ordinary citizens stood against extraordinary injustice, knowing the risks yet refusing silence. Their courage, alongside global solidarity, brought one of the world's harshest systems of racial oppression to an end. Women's rights movements gained momentum, pushing for equality in education, voting, work, and personal autonomy. Feminists across continents challenged deeply rooted systems of patriarchy. The movement expanded over time to include reproductive rights, protection against gender-based violence, economic justice, and intersectional awareness of how race, class, and identity shape experience. LGBTQ+ movements emerged from shadows of criminalization and stigma, demanding recognition, safety, and equality. What once seemed unimaginable became tangible: marriage equality, anti-discrimination protections, and global conversations about identity and human dignity. Throughout the late 20th century, new visions of justice unfolded. International courts were established to hold individuals accountable for war crimes and genocide. Treaties protected the rights of children, refugees, women, and persons with disabilities. Nations began to integrate human rights into their constitutions and legal systems. Yet even as progress accelerated, new challenges emerged. Economic inequality widened. Millions struggled under poverty, while a small percentage accumulated immense wealth. Globalization connected economies, but also exposed workers to exploitation. Technological advancements brought new freedoms and new threats to privacy, autonomy, and identity. Take a quiet breath. Notice how justice expands and adapts, but never remains still. Modern human rights are not static. They are living principles that evolve with society. Their strength depends on the willingness of governments, institutions, and individuals to uphold them and to question their failures. In the 21st century, human rights movements confront a more complicated landscape than ever before. Climate change threatens ecosystems, communities, and future generations. Digital surveillance challenges privacy. Misinformation undermines democratic systems. Migration crises leave millions displaced. Conflicts continue to erupt, and political polarization strains the trust necessary for collective action. Yet amidst these challenges, there is also remarkable resilience. Activists use digital networks to organize across borders. Young people mobilize for environmental justice. Indigenous groups fight to protect land and tradition. Global communities share knowledge, empathy, and solidarity at unprecedented speed. Human rights today are not defined by treaties alone. They are defined by the ongoing effort to ensure that every human being can live with dignity, autonomy, and opportunity. And this brings us to a deeper question, one that philosophers, psychologists, and spiritual traditions have asked for centuries. If freedom is a universal right, how do we carry the responsibility that comes with it? How do we balance personal liberty with the well-being of others? How do we use freedom wisely, compassionately, and with integrity? Take a slow breath. The global stage recedes. The noise of nations quiets. The focus turns inward once more toward the individual, the community, and the moral weight of choice. We step now into the next chapter, freedom and responsibility, and the paradox that lies at the heart of human autonomy. Freedom and responsibility. Freedom is one of humanity's most cherished ideals, yet it carries a quiet paradox at its center. To be free is to choose one's path, but each choice touches the world around us. Every action influences others. And so freedom, in its deepest form, is inseparable from responsibility. The two move together, like breath and heartbeat, each defining the other. Take a slow, easy breath as the vast global landscape of human rights softens into a more intimate space. The noise of nations fades, replaced by the quieter questions that live inside each of us. What does it mean to use our freedom well? What responsibilities do we carry simply by being human, by being connected, by being part of a larger community? Freedom begins as an inner experience, a sense of autonomy, agency, and self-direction. Yet the moment we step into relationship with others, freedom becomes relational. It interacts with the freedoms of those around us. It must coexist with their dignity, their safety, their rights. This is the paradox. We are free, but we are not alone. In psychology, researchers describe three core forms of freedom: freedom from, freedom to, and freedom with. Freedom from refers to the absence of constraints, freedom from oppression, fear, violence, discrimination, or coercion. It is the most basic layer of autonomy and the foundation of all human rights. Freedom to refers to positive abilities, the freedom to express oneself, to pursue one's goals, to learn, to create, to build a meaningful life. This form of freedom requires opportunity, resources, and support. It grows in environments where people feel safe, valued, and empowered. Freedom with refers to the most complex layer, the freedom to live in harmony with others, to balance individual autonomy with collective well-being. This form of freedom is the essence of responsibility. It recognizes that true liberty flourishes not in isolation, but in community. Take a gentle breath. Notice how these forms of freedom reflect the same evolution we have traced throughout history. From biological instincts to social norms, from philosophical ideas to legal rights, freedom has always been intertwined with responsibility. Philosophers across cultures have grappled with this balance. In ancient Greece, Aristotle taught that freedom must be guided by virtue, courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. Without virtue, freedom became mere impulse. With virtue, it became a path to harmony. In India, the concept of dharma emphasized that individual actions must align with a larger moral order. Freedom was never absolute. It was shaped by one's duties and the interconnectedness of all beings. In China, Confucian teachings highlighted the responsibility bound to family, community, and society. A free person was one who cultivated moral character, not someone who acted without restraint. In Buddhism, freedom meant liberation from ignorance and desire and compassion toward others. Responsibility grew from mindfulness and understanding. In indigenous traditions around the world, freedom was woven into the fabric of nature. Responsibility meant caring for land, community, ancestors, and future generations. Freedom was not something taken from others. It was something shared. Across these traditions, responsibility is not a burden. It is an expression of freedom, a way of honoring the autonomy of others, a way of participating in the well-being of the whole. Yet modern societies often struggle with this balance. The idea of individual freedom can become distorted into isolation, entitlement, or disregard for others. Without responsibility, freedom becomes chaotic. Without freedom, responsibility becomes oppressive. The art of living well lies in holding both with care. Consider the choices we make each day, what we say, how we listen, how we treat others, how we consume resources, how we vote, how we speak out, how we remain silent. Every action contributes to the world we create for ourselves and others. Responsibility also includes the courage to face uncomfortable truths. Freedom requires honesty. It requires the willingness to acknowledge harm, to repair relationships, to learn and unlearn. It requires the humility to see that our actions ripple outward in ways we cannot always predict. Take a slow breath, allowing a sense of inner spaciousness. Freedom invites us to explore our potential. Responsibility grounds us in empathy. Together, they create the conditions for a life that is meaningful, connected, and humane. In psychology, there is a concept called moral agency, the ability to reflect on consequences, to choose one's actions intentionally, and to accept responsibility for their impact. Moral agency grows from awareness. It grows from empathy. It grows from the realization that every person we encounter carries a life as complex and precious as our own. When people embrace both freedom and responsibility, justice becomes more than a system. It becomes a lived experience, a way of being in the world that honors autonomy while nurturing community. This balance is also essential for societies. Democracies thrive when citizens use their freedom to participate thoughtfully, voting, engaging, questioning, advocating for fairness. Communities thrive when individuals support one another, share resources, and act with compassion. Even global movements rely on this balance, requiring both independence and solidarity. As technology transforms our world, the relationship between freedom and responsibility becomes even more important. Digital communication gives individuals immense power, power to share ideas, influence others, and shape collective narratives. This freedom demands responsibility for truth, empathy, and awareness. Economic choices affect ecosystems, livelihoods, and global markets. Political choices influence the freedoms of future generations. Personal choices shape the well-being of loved ones and communities. The breath rises softly here. Notice how freedom expands outward, touching everything. Notice how responsibility draws inward, anchoring us. Together, they form a moral compass. As we stand in this delicate balance, another question emerges. one of growing urgency. What does freedom mean in a world shaped by technologies our ancestors could never have imagined? Surveillance, artificial intelligence, climate instability, genetic engineering, global networks. How will justice evolve as boundaries blur, as power decentralizes and concentrates in new ways, as the world becomes more interconnected and more fragile? Take one more breath. The present moment stretches forward, inviting us into the unknown. The story of freedom and justice is not finished. It is entering its most complex chapter yet. We step now into the future, where humanity faces challenges and possibilities that will redefine our understanding of freedom for generations to come. The future of freedom. The world is changing faster than at any other moment in human history. Technologies once imagined only in fiction now shape daily life. Nations are more connected, yet more divided. Information moves at the speed of light, yet truth grows harder to discern. Power no longer resides only in governments or institutions. It pulses through digital networks, algorithms, data streams, and global systems that touch every human being. In this shifting landscape, the meaning of freedom is evolving. Justice must reinvent itself, and humanity faces questions that stretch beyond the boundaries of any past civilization. Take a calm, steady breath. The familiar landmarks of history fade. The horizon expands. We step into a new terrain, uncertain, exhilarating, and deeply consequential. At the heart of the future lies technology. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, digital surveillance, climate engineering, and global communication networks have the potential to expand freedom, or restricted it, in ways more subtle and pervasive than anything seen before. Begin with artificial intelligence. Algorithms guide decisions about what we see online, how we work, how we travel, and increasingly, how governments function. AI can personalize education, diagnose disease, optimize energy use, and predict environmental shifts. It can expand freedom by offering knowledge, opportunity, and accessibility to millions. But AI can also concentrate power. It can amplify bias, manipulate information, monitor behavior, and shape perception. Surveillance technologies, cameras, satellites, data tracking, can create systems of control that far exceed the reach of past empires. A government, corporation, or institution with access to vast data can influence thought, emotion, and choice without overt force. Freedom may be lost not through chains or soldiers, but through quiet, invisible constraints. Take a slow breath here. Notice how freedom becomes more delicate in a world where influence is subtle, where autonomy depends not only on laws, but on awareness and digital literacy. The future of justice must include transparency in technology, ethical use of data, and systems that protect human agency. Without these safeguards, the balance between freedom and control may tilt dangerously. Biotechnology brings another set of possibilities. Gene editing can cure diseases, extend lifespans, and transform medicine. But it also raises questions about identity, inequality, and the ethics of altering life. Who decides which traits are desirable? Who controls access to enhancement technologies? How do we ensure that progress serves humanity rather than dividing it into new hierarchies of physical or cognitive advantage? Climate change presents a different kind of challenge, less technological and more existential. As ecosystems shift, as sea levels rise, as resources become strained, entire populations may be forced to migrate. Environmental instability threatens economic security, national sovereignty, and political stability. The freedom of future generations depends on the choices we make today. Justice in the era of climate change requires not only resilience, but fairness. Those who contribute least to global warming often suffer the most. Droughts, floods, and extreme weather disproportionately affect vulnerable communities. The future demands a new form of global cooperation, one that protects land, water, air, and life itself as shared responsibilities. Take a soft breath. Notice how freedom becomes intertwined with the planet, a reminder that autonomy is impossible without livable Earth. The digital world adds yet another dimension. Online spaces offer unprecedented freedom of expression. Movements for justice can form overnight across continents. Individuals who once felt isolated can find community, support, and solidarity. Knowledge has become more accessible than at any point in history. Yet the digital realm also fragments truth. Echo chambers isolate people into ideological islands. Misinformation spreads faster than facts. Social media platforms can manipulate attention in ways that exploit human psychology. Technology amplifies the voice of the individual, but it also amplifies conflict, polarization, and extremism. Future freedom depends on cultivating digital wisdom, the ability to navigate information with discernment, empathy, and critical thinking. Economic systems will also shape the future of justice. Automation may displace jobs. Wealth inequality may deepen. New industries may concentrate power unless societies create safety nets that ensure opportunity for all. Economic freedom is not merely access to money. It is access to stability, education, safety, and the ability to pursue meaningful purpose. Global justice movements are rising to address these challenges. Young people lead climate marches. Activists demand ethical AI. Indigenous communities fight to protect ecosystems. Grassroots networks coordinate solutions across borders. The future of freedom may be shaped less by governments and more by people refusing to accept injustice, even in its most modern forms. Take a slow breath. Feel the subtle shift in the air. The future is uncertain, but uncertainty carries possibility. Humanity has something it has never had before: global awareness, the ability to learn from every culture, every era, every tradition. The story of freedom and justice is no longer isolated within nations. It has become a planetary story woven from billions of lives. The future asks us to rethink our most basic assumptions. It asks us to expand empathy beyond borders, beyond species, beyond time. It asks us to build systems that respect both autonomy and interdependence. It asks us to recognize that freedom is not a solitary pursuit, but a collective one. Responsibility becomes more global. Freedom becomes more inner and more outer. Justice becomes more ecological, ethical, and inclusive. The choices we make now ripple across generations. As the breath settles, imagine yourself standing at the threshold of possibility. Behind you, thousands of years of human struggle, instincts, myths, laws, revolutions, reforms. Ahead of you, a world still being written. The story does not end here. It continues in every decision we make, in every act of compassion, in every choice to understand rather than divide, in every effort to uphold dignity, in every moment we honor freedom, not as a possession, but as a responsibility. Justice is not a final destination. It is a process, a living movement that evolves with humanity. And freedom is not merely a right. It is an invitation to shape the world with awareness, clarity, and care.